The inspiration for the textbook really came from students. I'd been teaching in Australia for a number of years, and at the end of each semester students constantly complained about the fact that they had to listen to all this American stuff and read about all this American stuff when there was so much Australian and New Zealand information out there that would be just as good. And so that really got me thinking about, well, why don't we have an Australian textbook? And I looked in the marketplace and found that some companies did have Australian textbooks in international marketing, but the problem with them was that a lot of the terminology wasn't common terminology in international marketing, and they weren't written in such a way that actually suited the semester-long terms that we have in Australia. So I actually approached Cengage and asked them if they were interested in somebody adapting one of the American textbooks for the Australian and New Zealand market and making it more appropriate for student learning in Australia and New Zealand. If I look at the book overall, probably the thing I'm most proud of is the fact that we have so many Australian, New Zealand and Asia Pacific examples throughout. Every single chapter has numerous examples of things that are relevant to Australian, New Zealand and Asian students, and it just makes learning for those students so much more enjoyable because they can actually relate to the examples that are in there. And I think at the end of the day what we're trying to do with this textbook is to improve learning outcomes of students, and by putting those examples in there and by having them in every single chapter and having them relevant to the students really at the end of the semester are a lot more comfortable with international marketing and have achieved a lot more in terms of their learning outcomes. The value of the textbook for other academics is the fact that it can enhance their teaching, especially with the fact that we have a case at the end of each chapter, as well as numerous examples throughout the chapter of Australian, New Zealand and Asia Pacific content. We also at the start of each chapter have a panorama which basically showcases what's going to happen in the chapter with a relevant example to this particular region. The end of chapter cases are fantastic in terms of student learning, and the fact that we now have so many of them and also have access to the first edition's case studies on the internet for any academic who adopts the textbook is just fantastic. I really think the examples, the case studies and the amount of up-to-date information we've put in this textbook makes it a fantastic text for academics and makes their learning a lot, or makes their teaching a lot easier. Okay, I think students will like the up-to-date examples that are in the text because we've introduced even more within this text from both Australia, New Zealand and the Asia Pacific. I also think they will like the case studies because now at the end of each chapter there is a small case study, and that is something that students tend to like because they like to be able to apply the theory to those case studies. So I do think students will like that. We're also very much conscious of sustainability and the environment, and that's something that today's students are very mindful of, and I think the little outtakes we have throughout the textbook on sustainability and the environment will catch students' attention, and they will like that as well. I feel our book is different from other resources for this subject area, mainly in terms of its strong theoretical foundation. It uses an American textbook which had very, very strong theoretical foundations, and it builds on those. It adds to those with very good examples from Australia and New Zealand. It doesn't take any shortcuts. It doesn't attempt to dilute that strong theoretical foundation. So it really makes it stand out within the marketplace as a strong theoretically a book with a strong theoretical foundation which has fantastic local examples which are relevant to students and to academics. In terms of the length of semester in Australia and New Zealand, the difference from American textbooks where they tend to be very long, sometimes 22 chapters long. This one has shortened the amount of chapters, but again, not by diluting the theory that's in there, but by combining relevant chapters, by looking more for the relevant information for the Australian New Zealand market, and by adding to that with examples. So it suits the Australian New Zealand semester length way better than anything else on the marketplace. The major challenges in teaching in international marketing are keeping it up to date. Things change so quickly. It's such a dynamic area of teaching and learning, and it's important that students are kept up to date with what's happening. I think that's where our textbook really fills a gap for a lot of academics who may not be able to keep up with what's happening. We have, as I said, updated quite considerably, so the information, up-to-date information, is there ready at their fingertips. Another challenge, of course, is being relevant and keeping students in touch with reality, because often as academics we tend to divorce ourselves from reality and concentrate on, you know, what do we need to teach the students, what do they need to learn, what are we trying to achieve, without ensuring that they're actually kept up to date with what's happening in the real world. And I think that's really, really important, to make sure that we bridge that gap between academics and the real world, and that's where our textbook really, as I believe, fills a gap, because it bridges that gap between academic and reality by ensuring we have a strong theoretical foundation, and also by bringing in those real life examples that allow students to see how this applies in the real world and overcomes that major challenge in our area. I suppose the best way of thinking of how our textbook supports academics in meeting these challenges is by providing them with up-to-date relevant information, up-to-date relevant examples, and probably most importantly for academics, a wealth of case studies. 15 updated, some of them new case studies, longer part case studies, allowing academics to really bridge that gap between academic and the real world, and taking students on that journey through those case studies and allowing them to achieve even greater learning outcomes. And I really think that's where our book has probably the greatest strength, in that it does bring the good theoretical foundation of the book and the academic information that's necessary for the students, but it matches that with relevant examples, relevant up-to-date information, and some fantastic case studies.